Hello and welcome to this week's video tutorial for virtualracingschool.com, where we visit Mount Panorama Circuit in Bathurst, Australia for Season 4, Week 4 of the iRacing Blancpain GT3 series. This is our first visit to the circuit since starting these videos, and you can check out a full hour-long recording of my driving preparation in virtual reality for the datapack, an eventual lap which we will analyse shortly. Bathurst is a formidable challenge for the driver, with its closely lined walls and huge unforgiving elevations, and is technically a street circuit. It's also a very long lap, with the mountain section offering zero margin for error and multiple blind apexes. As a result, it's seen many nasty accidents over the years, and is used less and less due to increasingly strict safety standards. This of course doesn't matter in a simulator, so we get to enjoy it as much as we like. The lap I've done this time round is with the Audi R8, which is very tricky around here but prefers the long straights. As usual, I've used default weather to keep things relative and qualifying fuel. I'll play the lap through as normal before then going into further analysis. So there we go, that was actually the second lap of a 2-lap run, so the tyres weren't quite at optimal, but it's still a pretty good lap. I'm positive that a 2:02 is possible. It's a very long lap though, so it's very difficult to get everything hooked up together in one lap. But I definitely lost a bit of time out of in the middle of Murray's corner for sure. You have to forgive me for the corner names, by the way, which I got mostly wrong, I believe, in my driving preparation video. I'll try and get them right this time. I've got a different track map. I think the one that I was looking at was wrong. Yeah, so if we take it back to the last corner on the circuit, which is Murray's corner, so obviously we want a pretty good run out of here to start our new lap. We've got a fairly long run down to the straight, so we want a nice clean exit down towards turn 1, which is none other than Hell Corner. Keeping it quite tidy. That was quite nice and tidy. Not using any of the exit curb that time. You can use the exit curb, but you need to be prepared for some oversteer if you do. So braking point for turn 1 is going to be about 75 meters, I would say, so pretty much halfway between the two markers on the right, maybe 80 meters in fact. Braking quite hard, again as usual bleeding off the pedal as you turn in, but not really holding onto the pedal this time, because it's such a short apex. So it's a 90-degree corner and it's very short in terms of the middle of the corner. The inside of the corner is very sharp, so a very short radius. So you're off the brakes quite quickly, and then once you've hooked up with that apex, try and avoid the curb on the inside if you can. Try and feed the power in quite nicely. Your traction limited in second gear at this point, and then just open the steering up for the exit. Keep it nice and straight on the exit. Again, you can allow the car to run up onto this exit curb, but you just need to be prepared for some oversteer if you do that, because it can be quite aggressive. So keeping the car nice and straight down Mountain Straight towards, this is actually Griffin's Bend, not Quarry. Quarry is later on. And this is quite nasty because it's uphill, and it really tightens. It surprises you. It tightens on the exit. So it kind of, it's interesting. It's very sort of sharp on the entry, and then it sort of opens up and then tightens again on the exit. So and this is all occurring whilst going uphill, and it's a funny one because even though it's kind of cambered in slightly, you still struggle for front end grip, or at least I do, and the car kind of understeers. So it's important to not try and take too much speed into here, because you want to get on the power nice and early so you can hook up and pull yourself round for the exit. So if we just take it back through the braking zone, there is going to be pretty much the end of that wall on the left there. So if we just go to chase camera, so just before that wall ends, so pretty much where the darker area of the wall ends, you're hard on the brakes. It's uphill, so you can press the brakes quite hard. As you turn in, you're bleeding off. Make sure you keep it nice and tight. That's very important. And wait for the car to settle. So there's a little bit of a bump there. You see that? Just there. Now, I'm not actually in contact with the curb there. That's purely from the circuit itself, as you can see there. So there's this bump right here. It's not the curb, it's the actual circuit. So you have to be off the pedal inputs at that point until the car settles, before then feeding in the power nicely. Notice how I'm still really tight at this point, and that's because if you get too wide, so the thing is the circuit is sort of neutrally cambered here, but then it's off camber as the circuit goes uphill. So now we're off camber, and it has a tendency to kind of want to push us to this outside wall here. So our goal is to keep the car nice and tight as we're at full power. I was a little bit too late to get to full throttle there. Just left myself a little bit of margin on the exit, and then we run towards the cutting. Now this is very tricky because you're braking whilst turning, and then the corner really tightens up where you have to basically get as close to that wall on the left as possible. Now you want to enter this one from as wide a line as you can, so obviously I bring the car over fully to the right at this point, right up close to the wall there, and then again aiming for this inside wall here, and then I brake just before then, and that way I can keep my braking as straight as possible. It's not possible to be fully straight under braking, but you can keep it as straight as you can, and you want to be braking just before you see this wall on the left. So braking now. Now you can't brake too aggressively here. If you do brake too aggressively whilst loading up the fronts like that whilst turning in, you'll get some nasty entry oversteer. So just be aware of that, and and don't brake too hard and too aggressively. So we're bleeding off the brake pedal there, letting the car run all the way to the outside of the circuit, or as close as you're willing to let it run, and then once again we're aiming to pull the car in nice and tight again for the second apex here. So right up against this wall, pretty close there, that's for sure, and be really progressive as you pick the throttle up on the exit. That's very important. You're quite traction limited through here, so if you're too aggressive with the throttle, you can get some really nasty oversteer up the hill, and especially as you crest through this right-hander. Now this is the beginning of Quarry Corner, I believe. So sometimes you have to lift. Do I lift? Yeah, so I have a small lift there. You're going to be traction limited, so either you'll lift or the TC is going to engage, so you're probably best off just lifting. Again, keeping it nice and tight to this inside wall, keeping the steering as neutral and as open as you can afford to, and just letting the car run out again towards this outside wall. So the whole time we're using as much of the track as possible, right up against there again, and then this is a very fast right-hander, which heads out towards, I believe it's called Frog Hollow. So this one's very nasty again, just kind of playing with the throttle on entry before then committing to full power. So you notice there, I don't even brake, so I just have a lift, and then I'm just kind of playing with the throttle, waiting for my car to set up where I want it to be. Once I'm happy that it's hooked up in the road nicely, again this kind of crests, and it's a little bit off camber at the top, so you've got to be really careful as you go through here, not to overdo it and clip this wall on the exit. But yeah, pretty close to this wall. Fortunately you have this curb here which can kind of help the car stay off there, but that tends to throw the car out to the right if you do take too much of it, so that was pretty nice for me. And then you want to be bringing the car back over to the left. We're not quite fully over to the left as we crest down, and then this is really tricky, this left-hander. Just kind of playing with the throttle again, playing with my speed, and then into Philamy Park, and then towards Skyline. So if we take that back, just kind of modulating the throttle through this whole section, just to make sure that I maintain speed, because that's what is the most important thing really, is just to not unsettle the car too much on the brakes and just to maintain your speed. So we'll see that, letting the car sweep out to the right hand side again, off the throttle. Now I was actually just breathing on the brake pedal. It's very difficult to see that, but I am just breathing on the brake pedal, just covering it, ready in case I'm a little bit wide on entry, and then just kind of playing with the throttle, trying to get the car in nice and tight. That's quite good, that's nice and tight. We're aimed for the curb. Now you just want to glance over the curb, you don't want to take a lot of it, because it will pick up the car and throw you over to the right hand side if you do that. So that was quite nice. Again, I was able to keep the car nice and tight. You don't want to run too close to this exit wall. You can see lots of marks here from previous incidents over the years, I guess. And then running down, again you want to lift. So you see this right hand curb on the right here. You want to lift pretty much as that comes into view, or as you just run over it, sorry. So you just see that I'm up in 5th gear at this point. Now again, I'm just covering the brake pedal there. It's very difficult to see, but I just cover it, just feather it, and that's more of a confidence thing. But it's with this whole sequence, it's just about, and this will continue all the way down to Forest's Elbow. You're just kind of playing with the throttle to get the front end where you want it to be, because it's just about carrying momentum and being as tidy as possible. So that's what we're trying to do here, not turning in too late. You can carry a lot of speed in here, the circuit falls away, but then it kind of cambers up again mid-corner and grips up again. and pulls you round. You want to get nice and close to this curb on the left, just feathering the throttle again, lifting again, and then hard back on the throttle. Before I get alongside this exit curb, I'm hard on the throttle. Sometimes you can let the car go up onto that curb, but it is quite tall, so you need to be careful with it because it can unsettle the car with your run down towards Skyline. So obviously it's blind on entry, but we want to bring the car over to the left again to open up this section as much as possible, and then we're aiming for where this wall on the right drops away. Simultaneously we're braking well before this sign and well before the circuit actually does fall away. So we're pretty much just before the circuit crests, so just before we reach the highest point of the circuit we lift off. Another reference could be this banner on the left, so just before you get to that. It's quite significantly before then actually, so maybe that's not a good one. But either way, just before the circuit reaches its highest point, you want to be off the throttle and on the brakes. Now, because you're cresting, the car's very light at this point, so you can't afford to brake very hard, and also you are aiming for this inside wall, so you're kind of turning at the same time. So I'm literally only braking there a maximum of 30-25%, and then just kind of feathering the brake. I'm very close to the wall on the right hand side. It's a common theme pretty much. You need to flirt with the walls as much as you can, and then just as the rest of the circuit becomes visible, I actually increase my brake pressure slightly back up to 30% again. So we'll just see that come off the brakes very briefly, but then I'm back on. Now you may not want to exactly replicate what I'm doing because every single lap is going to be different. So if you brake a bit too hard, you might want to just come off, or if you brake too late, you might want to hold the brake on. The most important thing is I'm kind of setting myself up for the first part of the S's here. So you want to really abuse this curb on the left, let the car run all the way over that one, and the reason for that is it opens up the line as much as possible as the circuit then drops away to the right hander. Got a nice view up here, by the way. Now you want to be quite neutral with the pedals as you do run over this curb, as with all curbs in the Audi, and as soon as you get off it, as soon as you reach the end in fact, you're fairly hard on the brake, so basically 50%, which is a lot harder than I was braking at the top there. So important to take the speed off, down into second gear, and then as the circuit kind of falls away, you want to be fairly neutral with the pedals. You've got the speed taken off now. Again, you're hugging this inside wall. You've got a curb here to sort of protect you there, and then you don't want to turn in too late for this left-hander. Now I believe this one's called the dipper, and the reason for that is quite obvious. The circuit really plummets away suddenly, and very often your inside wheels take off completely. Sometimes the whole front end of the car takes off completely, and as a result you can't afford to brake too aggressively. So it's more important to have your speed down to where it needs to be first, and also you want to make sure you're in second gear. I did experiment with third gear, but second gear works better for rotation. So really close to that wall on the inside. Actually not as close as I could have been, but saying that, the circuit's a little bit flatter when you're wider, so it's probably okay to not be too close. It looks a lot closer from this angle, so that's interesting, but there we go. So I'm completely off the pedals at this point. So when the car is so light like that, you want to be pretty much off your inputs, and waiting for the car to settle and land. Now this one's very tricky. You've got a lot of compression. Now I was a little bit too aggressive with the throttle here on exit, and I got some nasty oversteer. right there, which coincided with when I had to turn right again, so I got away with it. But that could easily have ended in tears, because the car the circuit kind of has another little crest, so it compresses here, but then it crests again. It's a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest. And then you're immediately aiming for this inside wall on the right as you pick up the throttle. So I was briefly at full throttle there. Maybe that's not a good idea. It depends very much on how you land. If you land nicely, you can get to full throttle, no problem. So I had a little bit of oversteer there, so I immediately had to start lifting once again for the right-hander. So sometimes you can make it flat out through there, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to do that every lap. Up into third gear now as we go downhill towards Forest's Elbow. So again, we're keeping the car over to the left at this point, nice up against this inside wall. And now we want to start braking before we even start turning right. So although this is a fairly fast right-hander, we need to scrub some speed off before we start braking for the elbow at the bottom. So we've started braking a little bit just there, if I can find the correct view, but we're not braking very hard, just about 30%, and then we're off the brakes as we turn right. So we just see that again, we're quite close to this wall on the right again, and then the circuit kind of crests once again, so we come off the brakes, kind of feathering the throttle, and then as soon as the circuit straightens out, we're fairly hard on the brakes again. Now it's important to not leave your braking too late here and carry too much speed into here, because it's really important to get a good exit, because you have Conrod Straight after this, which is, I believe, the longest straight on the whole circuit. So your exit out of Forest Elbow is absolutely critical. So you want to make sure that you're really nice and tight and keep the car nice and tight for the exit. By that I mean at the apex. So obviously as I come in from a reasonably wide angle, not fully over to the right, because you're braking mostly in a straight line. If you try and keep the car further over to the right, you'll probably provoke some unwanted oversteer towards this right hand wall. So sort of towards the middle right of the circuit as we approach, as we start turning in, we're kind of bleeding off, and this is one of the few corners where I'm actually holding on to that brake as I turn in, because the circuit kind of falls away, and it's really important to keep the car nice and tight, as I've said. So we were still a little bit wide there at the apex, but fortunately the circuit kind of cambers up a little bit. It feels a lot tighter than that when you're actually driving, but obviously I could afford to have been a bit tighter, but still the circuit cambers up on the exit, and I was able to get on the power nice and early anyway. So we'll just play that through. So on the brakes, off the brakes, back on the brakes hard, into the middle, keeping it tight, hard on the throttle. Now I was kind of seesawing at the wheel there on the exit. That's because I was anticipating some oversteer, and also you notice I had 2 attempts to get to full throttle. The first attempt would have been too early, and the seesawing is just to anticipate any exit oversteer that I might have. Obviously I'm pretty much as early as I can afford to be there, right up close to the wall on exit. And then you got your long run down Conrod Straight, keeping the steering to a minimum so you don't scrub speed off. Bring the car gradually over to the left of the circuit for your run down through the chase, the right hand kink towards the chicane. The hardest braking point on the whole circuit, I would say, because you're carrying the most speed at this point. But yeah, you want to bring the car nice and tight to the right hander. Now there's a few references that you can use here, braking to the chase. You've got these patches of off-colour tarmac, brake just before them, or you've got this 100-metre board, or you've got the billboards on the right-hand wall here where they just turn red. But you want to be braking before all of those. So I'm probably braking, I would say, about 130 meters if I was to guess. But you might want to take a few times to practice that braking point. So yeah, hardest braking zone on the circuit, especially because the circuit kind of levels out and slopes up a little bit actually under braking, so the grip kind of builds in. But I'm at least 70% brake pressure there, and I'm kind of sustaining that for quite a long time, all the way down into second gear, and then eventually coming off as I turn in for the first part of the chicane. Now this is quite an aggressive first curb, so I choose to not take too much of it. Maybe in some of the other GT3 cars such as the BMW you can get away with more, I'm not sure, but certainly in the Audi you can't get away with too much. So wait for the car to settle. It's very easy to carry too much speed into the first part of the chicane and then completely mess up your exit because it tightens up again. But yeah, fairly hard, fairly early on the throttle for me. Just a little bit of oversteer, but that was alright. Using all of the track through the right-hander. And the most important thing really is to make sure that you don't lift off from this point until the last corner. Obviously if you are running wide, then I would advise lifting off, but the fastest way is to set the car up so you don't have to lift again. Just kind of let the car run out onto this exit curb, that's okay, and then gradually bring the car over to the right hand side for the final corner. Now I was a little bit too hot into the final corner and just lost a little bit too much time at the apex and on the exit. So we'll just have a look at that. Again, it's a fairly hard braking zone, but you don't have much in the way of references. You do have that 100-meter marker on the right there, but it's pretty much just after that you want to be braking, so I guess 80-90 meters. I would say 90 probably. So again, bleeding off the brakes as you turn in, but holding on to the pedal before then getting on the power. It's a very short apex again, much like turn 1. But yeah, so I was just a little bit just carried a bit too much speed in, so either came off the pedal a bit too soon or just left my braking just a tiny bit too late. But I was just fractionally wide of the ideal apex there, and as a result I had a bit of a slide right here for the exit, and you can see I'm just having to open the steering there, just to keep the car straight, and the TC was engaging at this point, so I lost a little bit of time for my run down to the line, but the run down to the line is quite short, so it was still quite a solid lap. Okay, so you can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-on-one tuition with top drivers from the likes of Coanda Simsport. Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.